Quick backstory. I'm a 21-year-old male, newly moved into my house, and I'm still not 100% familiar with my own neighborhood yet. The way the neighborhood was built makes it a rectangular shape, laying down on its long side, with my house being at the top right corner of it. So the other night, around 2:30 a.m., I was at my house alone when I decided to take a break from playing guitar and have a smoke before bed. So I grabbed a smoke and started out of my front door. About 3 or so minutes into my cig, I noticed a faint noise of what sounds like an old creaky metal object that needs to get oiled. But the sound had a cadence which makes it repeat every 2 or 3 seconds. After this happens for about 10 seconds, I notice that I can hear tires gripping the road as well. Then, out of nowhere, I see a man who looks to be in his mid-40s riding this horribly beaten down bike that emitted a very intense, ear-piercing, high-pitched squeak every time he pedaled. As I stood in my driveway and he passed me, he kept moving forward, but his head slowly rotated left and he locked eyes with me. I'm not kidding when I say that this guy looked identical to Hannibal Lecter from the movies. But that's not what made my heart drop. As I'm locking eyes with him and he's moving past my driveway, he suddenly gives me the scariest, most widest, scariest jagged toothed smile I've ever seen in my life, and continues to lock eyes with me. And this wasn't an ordinary smile. I'm talking a when the Grinch stole Christmas ear-to-ear smile. Within 15 more seconds, he continued pedaling and is out of sight. I can now just faintly hear his bicycle gears squeaking. At this point, I'm wondering whether or not he's going around my rectangular block of a neighborhood, and whether or not I can finish this cig fast enough to get inside before he comes around again. As I'm doing this, I begin to hear a metal creak noise, but I also hear something different. I hear this dude laughing like a maniac, which made me nope the hell out of there. As I'm stumbling for my door handle because of the adrenaline rush, he begins to round the turn when my door is almost in view. At the exact moment where I would become visible, I got my door open, ran in, and slammed it shut and locked it. No sooner does my door close do I hear the man from outside scream as loud as can be, "Where'd you go?" and laugh. The inflection of his voice was almost like he was mocking me, like he knew he was scaring the hell out of me and saw my door close, and he was acting like he was let down that he scared me off so soon. At this point, I went into full-out battle mode, ran around my house and turned all the lights off, battle crawled to my bedroom and waited. As I lay in my bed for the next 30 minutes, I would hear the squeaking of the bike for about 30 seconds, every 3 or 4 minutes. About 35 to 40 minutes later, it finally stopped and the man was gone. I have actually quit smoking since then and haven't been outside that late, but every now and then, around 2:30 a.m, I can still hear the squeaking of the bicycle from the outside of my room window. At the time this took place, I was 16 years old. I'm now 25. It was Halloween in my small South Louisiana town. It was a crisp night, the temperature was in the mid-80s, and the heat showed no signs of slacking off. I was walking around with my older sister and our friend Brooke. My sister had gone as a cat, and Brooke had gone as a witch. I had made the awful decision of wearing a formal gown, since I decided to go as a zombie prom queen. I had a crown and everything. I was drowning in that dress though. I was so hot, and the corset back was restricting my breathing. It was about 8:40, and all the kids were pretty much cleared out of the street. We were making our way to the park next to the city hall, where my mother was supposed to be picking us up. We were supposed to be there for 9. The 3 of us were about 6 blocks away at this point, and my sister had stopped to talk to a friend of hers. I was not stopping though. It was close to time for my mum to pick us up, and I was not going to be late. Also, I was miserable in that stupid dress, and I wanted to go home. I had carried on for about 2 blocks down before I'd noticed that my sister and my friend had both stayed behind. I was annoyed to say the least. I only had 4 blocks to go before I could lay down in my mother's minivan. Being alone in the dark was starting to give me the creeps. The yellow streetlights didn't do the ambience any favors. I kept my pace and kept walking until I heard the rumble of a muffler coming up behind me. I moved all the way off of the road. The large black truck came past very quickly and turned to the left in front of me. I passed the intersection and I only had 3 blocks left. Then I heard the truck again. I'd never moved back onto the road, so I didn't bother looking back. It wasn't too strange that the same truck had passed again. The 3rd time they passed, they slowed for a good 30 seconds or so. That is what scared me. I didn't recognize the truck, and the windows were tinted heavily. As soon as I thought I could see a bit of a face, they peeled out and disappeared around a corner. I made another block before I heard the truck again. It was 2 blocks away from my ride, and I was scared to start running. I already couldn't breathe because of the dress, and I was terrified I would pass out. As soon as I heard the truck, my stomach wrenched. I still kept walking, only a good bit faster than I had been. I kept my eyes down and watched my own shadow as the headlights came closer. I heard the brakes, and I had made the decision to run. But I was too late. I realized how close they were to me. I felt a sharp pain on the back of my head, and I looked up the best I could to see an arm sticking out of the window. An eagle clutching a sword was tattooed on the upper forearm. He had my hair wrapped around his fist. Before I could really comprehend the situation, he pumped the gas and was dragging me along the side of his truck. I was running as best I could, clawing his arm. I was crying and screaming. The only thing that kept running through my mind was that if I tripped, I was going to be run over. The man was just laughing. I was completely helpless. As soon as it started, he let me go. I fell to my knees on the asphalt, tore my dress, skinned my palms, and my scalp was on fire. I was inconsolable, and I was hyperventilating. I stood up, wiped my face, then I looked around and felt absolutely violated. I looked back at the way I'd come from and realized that this man had dragged me by my hair for a whole block and a half. Once I caught my head, I ran across the street to the park. My mother was nowhere to be seen. I climbed into the enclosed slide and I just curled up and cried. I don't know how long I was laying there before I heard my mother calling my name. I came out and she was walking up the street calling for me. I walked over to her. She looked me up and down and started freaking out. Apparently, I had blood on my face and dress from my hands. She ran to me and was asking me what happened and kept looking me up and down for a gash or something worse. I couldn't find my voice. I just held on to her and cried. We spent the next few hours at the police station filing a report. Long story short, nothing ever came of it. My sister got into trouble with my parents for not being at the city hall on time. She was grounded. My mother actually left City Hall to go look for us. She found my sister where I left her, and my sister hadn't even realized that I hadn't stayed. I also got into trouble for not staying with her, but I didn't get grounded. I'm still pretty mad that that dress was ruined, and I lost the damn crown. I'm even angrier that the man was never caught. This Halloween, I will be out with my godchild trick-or-treating. It'll be the first time that I've gone out in the 9 years since this happened. I've recently moved into a new apartment about 3 weeks ago, and I'm sharing it with my sister. The only person we know properly is a single mum who lives in the apartment next to us. Ever since we moved in, she's been giving us advice, helping us out with things, etc. We don't know any of our other neighbors properly yet. Today, I was out with friends, and after that, I went to get my sister so we could go out for some food. We got home at around 10 PM. My sister and I got into our PJs, and we were sitting around watching TV when our buzzer rang. I jumped up to answer it, and it turned out to be our neighbor, the single mum. I asked her what was up, and she said that our dad is asking for us downstairs. Straight away, my stomach dropped. I immediately asked her if she was sure he said he was our dad. The reason I asked this was to just make sure that this is what she actually said, but she replied that, yeah, he said he was our dad, and he was asking for us. The neighbor then asked if she could let him in up to our flat, but I told her no. I wanted to shout out to my sister, but I didn't want to worry her right away. So I asked the neighbor to not let him come up yet, and I heard her repeat this to him. I couldn't hear anything for a few minutes, and I started to get really worried. At this point, my sister comes up to me and asks who it is. I called out to my neighbor a few times, but she didn't answer. It must have only been about a minute, but it honestly felt like ages when she didn't reply. I was about to tell my sister to call 000 because I was starting to panic and I didn't know what was happening out there. But then she came back on and told me that he was gone. She then came up to our flat and explained what went down. She said that she was walking back to her flat after finishing work, and she saw a man by the buzzers. At first, she assumed that he was just someone who lived there, but when he noticed her walking up, he asked for us by name, and asked if she could let him in up to our flat. She asked him who he was, and he told her that he was our dad. Obviously, she buzzed us and told us first, since our neighbor doesn't know us that well, so she doesn't know what our dad looks like. She said that because we're young and on our own, she didn't want to buzz a strange man up to our flat. She said that her mum instincts kicked in when she heard me being hesitant to let him up to the flat. She said that apparently, after he heard me say that, he got really pushy with her and started trying to move her out the way. He kept on saying to her, "It's okay, I'm their dad. Let me in, I'm not gonna do anything." She started arguing with him and told him that if I don't feel comfortable letting him in, there's no way he's getting in. He then called her a bitch and got into a car and drove away. Now, this is the reason why I hesitated. We haven't spoke to our dad since I was 16. We even considered getting a restraining order from him at one point. He's even not our biological father, but we were legally adopted by him when I was 9. He was very abusive. It got to the point where me, my sister and my mum, had to leave him in the middle of the night. He was always really controlling, and after we left, he would secretly follow us around and leave threatening voicemails on the phone. I found out that he has a criminal record as well, and I believe he was convicted of manslaughter in the 80s. I have no idea of the backstory behind that, and honestly, I don't really want to know. Like I said, we haven't heard from him since I was 16, which was 3 years ago, and as soon as she said the word dad, I almost had a panic attack. I asked her to describe him, and she said that because it was dark out, she couldn't really see him. We ended up staying with her because me and my sister are really shaken up. I don't know whether to call the cops or not. I don't know if it was him or not, as it could easily be someone else. This happened back in elementary school. I was around 7 or 8. I haven't thought about it too much in the past years, but lately it's been on my mind. At school, there was an annual Halloween party where brothers and sisters of my elementary schoolmates were invited. We've always had lots of fun, eat spooky snacks, etc. I was wearing a vampire costume. I always wore vampire costumes on Halloween, and my best friend at the time, Sarah, had a strange costume that involved fake plastic chains, but seemed real because it was quite heavy. Sarah tells me she had to go to the bathroom, so we both headed over there. I wait for her outside the entrance of the toilet. Another couple of girls go into the bathroom, but I don't pay much attention to it. A few minutes go by, and I start getting very annoyed because I don't really want to miss the party. Another 5 minutes, I was pissed off. I turned around and entered the bathroom. I hear the sound of her chains moving around, but I can't really tell from which bathroom it's coming from, so I knock on every door. No response. I get to the ground and look through the spots between the door and the floor to understand where the noise is coming from, and I find it. Strangely, I see that she isn't alone in the bathroom. I raise my voice and ask if she's okay, and who was that girl? No reply. I start trying to open the door. We couldn't lock the door, so someone had to keep it closed somehow. I start panicking and screaming, and after I try with all my force a 7-year-old can muster, I manage to open it slightly. From this point, I have some confused memories, but I'll try to explain myself the best I can. I see a girl, and I knew her. She was the teenage sister of one of our classmates. I asked her what was happening, and she told me that Sarah was having some problems and she was helping her, but I didn't hear Sarah anymore. I kicked her ankle or leg and managed to get into the bathroom. I was scared as hell and just wanted my friend back. As I get into the bathroom, she closes it again, using her back to keep it closed. I look at Sarah, and she was sitting on the toilet with her face red, and the chains on her neck, she was slowly choking. I begin to scream, and the girl there slaps me. I was sobbing, crying, and basically, I wasn't able to move because of the fear. All I could do was scream as loud as possible again. A teacher finally arrives and gets me and Sarah out of there, calls our parents and an ambulance, and my parents bring me home while Sarah goes to the hospital. Turns out that her brother, our classmate, was pissed off by her and his sister decided to do something about it. She was a lot older than us at the time. I still get chills thinking about what happened, but I've never seen cops talking to my parents or at school, so I guess she got away with it. Me and Sarah never talked about it ever again, and when I try to ask her what happened, she just doesn't want to talk about it. I was home from college for an entire semester. I had developed relentless insomnia, and I just needed a break from living with 5 other guys. I got a job at Rite Aid, immediately hired on as a shift supervisor. Unfortunately, the closest store was in a relatively crime-ridden part of town. I had been working there for 4 months, and this particular night, my manager left me to my own devices. "You gonna be alright?" he asked repeatedly, and I assured him I would. It was exactly 8 PM when he left. I had to reorganize some shelves anyway, and the store was empty. At one point, I heard the door ding, and I went up front to assist. It was a young woman, probably in her 30s. She asked me some innocuous question about something we very obviously didn't have, like a cell phone or something. After apologizing for the inconvenience, she asked me a rather odd and admittedly unnerving question. "Is it just you here?" Obviously, I answered, "Yeah." Mistake. 15 minutes later, another woman entered, sporting multiple gold chains, bracelets, sunglasses, despite it being nighttime, and hot pink hair. She stopped and just stared at me, not saying a word. She quickly asked me if she could speak to a manager about a receipt, and I told her, again in my ignorance, "He's not here." She marched out quickly. We close at 10 PM. It was now 9:50. I had already counted down the drawers, and pulled out our $1,000 till in preparation for doing the deposit inside of the locked office. In the midst of this, noticing the time, I decide to take one last jaunt out to the parking lot to make sure no more customers were coming before locking up. I walked through the first set of sliding doors, through the vestibule, and out the second set to the sidewalk. Directly across from the entrance sliding doors was a pillar next to a garbage can, and leaning against it was a tall young gentleman staring into the store with a cell phone up to his face. I quickly glanced at him out of my peripheral before walking to the edge of the curb to scan the parking lot. I was feeling extremely uneasy, and dread was pulsating through my veins, but I tried to be passive and not directly pay attention to him, but something just felt off. Why is he staring into the store at closing? I passed him on my way in, and by the time I entered the store and turned around, I was being followed behind by the same guy, now with a bandana over his face and a gun pointed at my stomach. I put up my hands, but he instantly countered with, "Put your hands down and open the drawers." Okay, I replied, shaking, palms sweating. He subsequently followed inches behind me, with the muzzle of the gun pressed against my back. "I have kids, man," I said, lying to save myself, hoping for empathy. But I had already seen his face unmasked outside, so I assumed there was a good chance I'd become another random casualty in a crappy neighborhood. "Just open the damn registers." I did as he said, but I was in a world of pain because the registers had both already been counted down, and we only keep $50 in them during off hours in the form of change. A few ones, but a couple of fives. "Put it in the bag," he muttered with cold indifference. I dropped in all the cash from both registers, and that's when he hit me with a terrifying statement. "I know there's more." Inside I was screaming, veins throbbing, asking God for some divine intervention. The most horrifying moments of my life. I wasn't about to die for just minimum wage at Rite Aid, so I led him to the office, where the till drawer was already out on the desk. Down in the safe was a counted out deposit of $3.5 grand inside a zipped leather bag. In the till drawer was $1,000. "Here, this is all the rest I have." I prayed he didn't think or know about the separate deposit, so I took my chances. "Bring it out and dump it in the bag." I walked ahead of him as he pressed the gun even harder into my lower back, carrying the drawer to what I presumed would be my death. I saw his face. "He's going to kill me," I kept telling myself in my head. Marching to my likely doom, I could only comply, and I dumped it in. "Now, keep going," he said with that cold, psychopathic disposition, until we were back in front of the doors. I went quietly, and he turned to face me, aiming the gun at my head. And then he said, "Don't call police. Wait 10 minutes." He slowly backed out of the store and then ran off. I exhaled the biggest sigh of relief I've ever experienced. I stood there, frozen for about 30 seconds, before walking to the register and falling to the ground, seated, leaning against the wall. I called my manager and then police. Finally, after 5 minutes or so, I needed to run to the front entrance doors to lock them and pull down the gate. This was the most frightening part of the entire ordeal. Walking inside of a lit-up store towards a door leading out into pitch darkness. For all I knew, he had 3 guys out there waiting for me to get close before filling me with holes. I pulled the door shut and threw down the gate in what had to be record time, locked it, and nearly had a breakdown. Eventually, my manager, 3 police cruisers, and an unmarked SUV showed up. I was questioned for an hour by a detective, and they took the video footage evidence. By the next day, this guy was all over the PD's Facebook page, underneath the headline of $4,000 reward for information leading us to the assailant. I quit the next day and got a job at the mall in a more upscale area. But I'll end this one with one thing. It's been 15 years, and still unshakable in my soul was having seen the armed robber's face and believing quite positively for about 10 minutes that there was no way he would leave a living witness. I thank God that I was wrong, and also thank the Lord that he didn't know about the deposit and that I denied him nearly $4,000. Maybe there was some sort of intervention after all. I'm an overnight security guard for a large building at the parking ramp. It's generally a really quiet job with a lot of free time, but occasionally I do have to kick out homeless people. It's a horrible part of the job, and I do my best to direct them to the next safest place to sleep. Most people are understanding, as they unfortunately go through this a lot. If anything, they want to vent, and I try to be an open ear. Our protocol is to ask them to leave, then if they don't, tell them to leave. And if all else fails, we have to contact the police. I've only once gotten to that last step. It's important to note my general routine at work. I sit in a shack in the parking ramp for an hour, then I go for a walk around the building, and then back to the shack. The doors are all locked, but there's an entryway with an ATM that's open 24/7. This is usually where I find people looking for a place to sleep. For more context, I'm a smaller woman and unarmed. On this night, there was a woman trying to sleep by the ATM. I followed protocol, and after the first 2 warnings, I had to contact the police. She yelled at me, which is out of the normal but understandable considering her position. It must be frustrating being constantly kicked out of every semi-safe place. The police arrive, and because I was a little scared, I always am, I watched from the inside of the building, out of view, to make sure they got her out. If she was yelling at me, she was full on screaming at them. This goes on for about half an hour before she leaves the building. Unfortunately, that's all the cops are required to do, so she makes her way to the bus stop right outside. The problem with this is the bus stop is parallel with my shack. She just sits there and stares at me with hatred in her eyes. This gets uncomfortable pretty quickly, so I decide to take another walk. When I'm passing the door that leads out to my shack, I decide to take a peek out of the little door window. I don't normally do this, but I felt uneasy knowing she was probably still in the area, and it's a good thing I did. I can just barely see it, but behind my shack, I see the slightest wobble. There she was, hiding right behind my shack. It's not a big thing, maybe a 10-foot cube made of large windows and metal right at the entrance of the parking ramp. I have no doubt she was waiting for me. I call the police and just keep watching from the little window in the door. While I'm waiting, she eventually lets out an angry scream, kicks the miscellaneous junk in front of the shack, and storms up the stairwell in the parking ramp. For an extra kick of anxiety, the floor above me had a broken door that wasn't locked at the time. Eventually, police get there, and after some harsh words, they get her to leave again, and this time, she walks off into the night. What really scares me was what I found on my next walk. There's a mirror next to the door I was watching her from. I couldn't see it from the inside, but from this side it was obvious. She had broken the mirror into a large piece that was missing. Maybe I've allowed my anxiety to build all this up in my head, but from my perspective, She had taken a large, sharp object, hid behind my shack, and waited for me to walk up. You tell me if I'm overreacting. But to my nameless potential assailant, I wish you better times and a bed to sleep in, but I also hope we never meet again. A couple of weeks ago, my mum was coming back from the store at around 10 PM, got herself a pack of cigarettes, and was hanging out with a friend of hers as she did so. On their way back, they came across Jeremy. It was a guy they have both, and even I have seen a couple of times. Nothing major, just an acquaintance we all barely spoke to, though he was either high as hell this time around, or drunk, or both, I don't know. I do know this wasn't how he usually acts. Jeremy was angry over something, and came up to them and started screaming about wanting to f them, and pulled his out, in public. After both my mum and her friend tried to just walk out of the situation, he started attacking my mum. Both my mum and her friend started fighting back, and they managed to get him to stop, and made their way back to her house, where I currently am at, unaware of what the hell's going on. However, note that I said stop, not leave. He lived in the same building as I do, and was following them from a distance away. So they both made their way upstairs. When my mum realized she had left her key inside, nothing new, she's pretty forgetful, and I'm generally here to open the door when she does. Problem being, Jeremy made his way upstairs too, past where his floor is, and up 2 hours, and he tried to fight her again. I opened the door to my mum shouting my name and being absolutely clueless as she entered and tried to close the door. But Jeremy pushed the door open before it could be shut and made his way into our apartment. This is where I got involved. I grabbed a knife and threatened him to get out, which he did. I have no idea how he managed to get this impression, but he seemed to think I was trying to fight him, because after we made sure to slam the door, the moment he exited and locked it, he started screaming at the top of his lungs about how we were pussies and to call the police, claiming he knows the landlord and could get him to delete any footage caught from the outside of the building and the hallways inside the building. My mum, being a quick thinker, started recording him from the door as he banged and kicked it, trying to get it open. Eventually, he left when he heard that we actually were calling the cops. You would think this would be over, right? Nope, it keeps going. After a couple of minutes, he returns to the door with a knife and starts stabbing our door while screaming and insulting us at the top of his lungs, saying he will kill the cops too. The police can clearly hear him from the phone. I think that's why they came this time around, and these guys are usually absolutely useless. The doors in this building are strong and metal, but while he made some light holes and scratches, he couldn't do too much to it, so he shouts that he'll be downstairs waiting for the cops, when we of course inform the cops, who are currently on the phone. And like with perfect timing, while he makes his exit, they make their entrance, using both the 2 different elevators. 4 officers knocked on our door, and we opened up and told them what was going on and what happened from start to finish. While my mum showed the cops the footage she recorded, I was taking pictures of the damage to the door. The cops, clearly not wanting to be here, begrudgingly said to come downstairs with them, so me and my mum did, to which we heard screaming from the 1st floor. We're on the 5th floor, and we heard him perfectly, though his screaming stopped really quickly when 4 cops showed up, instantly went, "Oh shit," and played nice with the cops. The cops were not having any of it and arrested Jeremy there and then. His friends were there, asking what he did and screaming and shouting at the cops before eventually running off. Jeremy was taken away. I sent the damages to the door to lawyers, and don't know what happened about that. Silence. So this is where the story ends, right? Nope. Jeremy got off with a restraining order, though since he lived in the same building as us, we couldn't stop him from simply being in the building. He was only not allowed to talk to us or cause any problems. This did not last long. On my way to the store maybe 2 weeks later, he and his friends were all outside the building in a group, chatting and drinking. When I walked out, Jeremy instantly switched up the topic, saying, "You see that kid? I'm gonna f*** him up. He got the cops on me. F*** the restraining order." I wanted to get away from that as soon as possible, but I had already left the building and would need to get close to the group that I'd just finished taking my first couple of steps away from in order to get back inside. So I quickly made my way to the store, since I would be in public with people present. I ended up just getting everything I need from the store, while trying to call my mum to tell her what happened. Didn't answer. Great. And here's where I admit I was a little dumb. I should have instantly called the cops, but I didn't. I didn't remember what Jeremy was wearing, and I am honestly a wreck with anxiety. I wanted to first see if the group was still there before I attempted to make a phone call. They weren't, and I quickly made my way upstairs to inform my mum, who calmed me down and got me to call the police. The exact same police as last time showed up, and thank God for that, since they were well aware of Jeremy being a nutcase from last time. But this time, we had no proof other than what would just end up being a he said she said scenario. So they had us sit in the hallway while they called their boss to make sure the arrest would be okay due to the previous history and restraining order. All the while, Jeremy was in the staircase, laughing and being extremely loud with his friends and his sister, from what I learned. Eventually, the police got an okay from their boss, and we all made our way to the staircase. I tried to stay as much out of sight as possible, as they once again arrested Jeremy. He claimed to be unaware of what he was being arrested for, and his friends left once again. His sister, who was in her mid-20s from what I could guess, was screaming though, insulting them and saying he was being arrested for no reason. Jeremy was hauled away again, and I have no idea what happened. No calls from attorneys or the police, no nothing. Though I ended up seeing him within the week, straying from eye contact with me or my family, usually walks away the moment he sees us. I wish more came of this, but I'm happy we're being left alone all the same, though he is always pissed at seeing me. First, a bit of context. I'm a 19-year-old female, and when I was younger, from about 10 years old to 15, I used to live in a semi-rural area, like a small town with some fields around. During this time, I used to have a best friend that lived in another town, but still close enough that we could go to each other's houses on our own. And we both lived really close to the roads that connected our towns. We used to see each other almost every day, but my friend Alan and I almost never texted each other, because even though I was very into social media and stuff, he was the kind of guy that almost never used his phone, so he ended up losing his phone at his house or a friend's house quite a lot. So the only time we texted each other was to warn the other one if we weren't able to meet that day. If no one sent anything in the morning, or the day before, it meant that we were going to see each other later that day. If the weather wasn't good enough to stay outside, I used to go to his house. He had better video games. The path I used to take to go to his house was something like 1.5 kilometers, I think. It was the only way possible, because the towns were separated by a river, so we had a bridge to cross to go from one town to another. On this path, first there are a lot of houses, then only a few houses and a chemical factory on the other side of the road. Then there's nothing but trees from my side, and still the factory from the other. Then there's the bridge, which isn't very long because it's not a very big river. On my side, there are 2 paths that lead to both sides of the river, which a few people use for walking or fishing. After the bridge, there's nothing but trees until the end, where there's a warehouse and the street where Alan lives. I've taken this path 1,000 times with him or my parents, or on my own, so even though there's not a lot of people walking there, it never made me nervous walking it alone, even when it started to get dark. But as I've said earlier, this road connects our towns, so there are some vehicles driving there. One day, however, something went wrong. This story takes place when I was 13 years old. I was heading to Alan's house, as usual, and when I reached the area with less houses, a white van that was coming from behind me slowed down next to me with the window open. Several times before, lost drivers had asked me or my friends for directions, so it didn't really surprise me, and I just watched the man inside the van. I can't really remember what he looked like. I just remember that he was in his 30s or 40s, bald, with no facial hair. He had a kind of creepy smile, but I didn't pay much attention to that and just waited for him to say something as I kept walking slowly. As I was walking, he moved too at my pace so we could talk. "Hello," he said finally. I said hello too, still waiting for a question. "Where are you going?" he asked, smiling and staring at me. I frowned because, of course, this wasn't the type of question I was expecting. At this point, I wasn't scared yet, just confused. I asked him why he wanted to know that, to which he replied, "If you have nothing to do, I can take you for a ride. Would you like that?" This started to get really weird, and I really wanted him to leave because I started to get scared. I chose to lie, thinking he would leave me alone if he knows that someone's waiting for me. So I said, "I can't. I'm going back home and my parents are waiting for me." But of course, he didn't leave. He was still smiling and staring at me, driving at my pace. He just said, "It's okay. We can just do a small drive then." I knew at this point that this man was trying to kidnap me, or worse, but I managed to stay calm and didn't show him any of my fear. "No, really I can't. I'm already late. I have to hurry up," I insisted. But it seemed that he really wanted to do whatever it was he was planning to do to me. And he replied, "Oh, then I'll drive you home. I don't want you to get scolded. But for that, you have to give me a kiss." He then leaned closer to the window and formed a kiss with his mouth, waiting for me to kiss him. At this point, we were really close to the bridge, which means that Alan's house was still far. For some reason, I didn't get the idea to just turn around and run for my life, either to home or the factory. So I just kept walking, refusing his offer. Of course he insisted, "Come on, just one kiss, right there." I remember wishing that a car or something would show up to help me, but the road was just deserted this day. He insisted a few more times, and I kept saying no, getting more scared every time. Eventually, once we were crossing the bridge, an idea crossed my mind. On the path that led to the second shore, there's a house. Usually, no vehicle is allowed to go down on the shore, so I thought he wouldn't follow me if I go there. So I said, "Not really, I don't need a lift, my home is right there." And I quickly turned to the right to pretend to go home. However, that was only half a smart move, because except for the house, there was nothing but trees and water for about 3 kilometers. So if there was no one in or on the shore, I would have been at his mercy. Like, what if he waited on the bridge and saw that no one opened the door? he could just come down and take me. Thankfully, there was a man walking his dog right next to the house. I ran to him and immediately crouched in front of the dog to pet him, trying to act like as if he was my dad or something. Obviously, the man was really confused, so I proceeded to explain to him the whole ordeal. But it turned out that he couldn't give a damn and walked away before I could finish telling him. I watched him leave, heading to the bridge, and noticed that the van was not there anymore. I was relieved, but didn't want to go back to the road because I was scared that he could have been hiding just a bit further, waiting for me. I stayed next to the house for about 2 or 3 minutes, trying to figure out what to do now, when a white van crossed the bridge again, slowly. When I saw it, I got terrified, thinking it was him again. It was a really common van with no distinct features, so I couldn't tell if it was really him. But they were driving really slowly, like they were looking for something. I froze for a few seconds, and then ran for my life along the shore for a long time before jumping into the forest. I ran for something like 2 kilometers, and to be honest, I didn't think I'd be able to run this much. When I finally arrived at Alan's house, it took me about 10 minutes to catch my breath. I was shaking and totally exhausted after running so much. I don't remember why, but I insisted on knocking at the door. I called him on his phone. Guess what? That was the one rare day of the year when he wasn't home, but he forgot to text me in the morning. I stayed next to his house for a couple of hours. I was too scared to go back home because I thought he was still on the road, but also I didn't want to call my parents because I was scared that they would forbid me going back to Alan's house alone. I eventually came back home, but instead of using the same path, I went through the forest and walked along the shore for a long time, seeking another bridge. My parents still don't know about this story. Creepy man that wants kisses from a 13-year-old girl. Let's not meet. I'm 23 now, but this happened when I was just a 17-year-old girl. In my last year of high school, I was the art chick. I was working on my portfolio so that I could apply to art school. I mainly did landscapes, but part of the requirement for our portfolios was life drawing. Obviously, my high school didn't have any nude life drawing classes, so my art teacher linked me up to a life drawing class at the local university, which is one of the top art institutions in the UK. So from my school, I had to catch a half-hour bus ride to the centre of the city, and then walk maybe 15 minutes up a long stretch through the student district. It was a 6-week course, and this happened on the 5th week. The class was really interesting, and I learned a lot since this was my first time working with life models. I was pretty confident and not too worried about walking alone at night. The class finished at maybe 9 PM, and it was pretty dark by the time I got out. So 4 weeks walking there and back, uneventful. 5th week walking there, totally fine. The 5th week walking back to my bus stop, also totally fine. 5 minutes at that bus stop, freaky as hell. So the stop I had to wait at was outside of an expensive private school in my city. There's a strip with about 4 bus stops and is always pretty busy. So busy that people don't even see what's happening right in front of them. So I must have been one of the first people there, and I'm standing outside of the bus shelter because I'm smoking and I don't want to make other people breathe in my smoke. So there are only a few minutes left until my bus, and I'm minding my own business when this guy comes and stands super close to me. Like, not as in infringing a bit on my personal space here close. Like, literally, I can feel him standing against me. He must have been in his 40s, and just had that general creepy guy vibe, and looked really grubby and disgusting. So, obviously, I'm a bit freaked out and sidestep away. So does he. I look at him, and he has the creepiest smug grin. By this point, I'm like, okay, so is he trying to freak me out, and he knows I know? I step away again, like fairly far away this time, and he follows me again, and is literally standing with the front of his body dead up against the back of mine. Honestly, I don't know how nobody noticed this or called him out. We were outside the shelter and it was dark. People are on their phones or having their own conversations. I guess it must have just been that. 23-year-old me is so pissed off at what an idiot I was for just shrinking away from him. This was before I had a few more let's not meet experiences that have shaped my loud radical women's rights advocacy. I literally just froze in the moment, even though there were people around who would have helped. I let this creep stand and push his junk up against me, probably for the same reason we all allow this to happen. I don't want to overreact. Maybe it's a misunderstanding. I don't want to seem rude. Please note that I am no longer afraid of men. So anyway, it gets worse. After dodging this creep for a few more moments, as time dragged in slow as hell, finally, this bus comes round the corner. Now, I might not have reacted properly, but I'm not stupid. I know if I get on this bus before this guy, he's going to sit next to me, which is what I need to avoid. So politely, I gesture and say, after you. He gives me that creepy look again and says, no, you go first. I insist, but he refuses again. There's a big queue now, and I don't want to hold anyone up, so reluctantly, I get on right before this guy. I get on the bus and do the only reasonable thing, which is to sit next to an old lady right at the front of this empty bus. The seats are only in pairs, so there's no way he can sit beside me now. Like I said, this bus is almost empty, so where does he sit? In the seat directly behind me. Great. So now I'm just sitting, trying to ignore him, which is pretty difficult to do when this guy keeps leaning forward and literally playing with my hair. I have really long hair, and his hands are on it. So don't ask me why, but at the time, my phone would let me call my mum, but if I tried to send her a text, the sending bar would just stick. I don't know if anyone else had this on the iPhone, but when the little green bar at the top would get to about 90% of the way along, it would just stick. That happened literally every time I tried to message her. Obviously, I was scared to call her. I didn't want him hearing what I had to say. I messaged my friend and told her what was happening, and how I thought that if I got off the bus, the guy would most definitely follow me. I still had a 10-minute walk home after I got off this bus, up a long straight road. So my friend calls my mum and tells her what's happening. My mum then calls me and relays what my friend had told her. Now, I'd been on this bus for about 15 or 20 minutes, and my stop was coming up in 5. It wasn't a big city, my area was suburban, and I don't know everyone, but I think I recognize most. I'd never seen this guy before. He wasn't local to my area, so I reasoned he had definitely been on this bus longer than his stop. Anyway, when my mum called, I just said to her, I'll be getting off the bus in 5 to 10 minutes. You need to get to X Street now to meet me. As soon as I said that, the creep pushes the button for the next stop, literally as soon as I say it. He stands up and makes sure to bang my arm and drag his body hard across me as he walks past, stares at me from the door and through the window as the bus drives away. I'm not 100% certain if he had bad intentions, or if he just got off on freaking out a 17-year-old girl who was on her own. The fact he pressed the button as soon as I'd confirmed someone was meeting me makes me think he did intend on following me. I didn't go to the final week of that class. So bus stop creeper, let's not meet. 17-year-old me was scared. Me today would straight up bust your balls. This story takes place in 2005. I was 12 years old at the time. My family wanted to take a vacation, and my mum and ex-stepdad decided it would be fun to take a cruise along the California coast with my 3 younger siblings and myself. As our ship made it under the Golden Gate Bridge, my mum and I stood out on her balcony to see San Francisco and the ocean beyond us. On the balcony to the right of her, a teenage boy emerged, presumably to take in the same views we were. My mum gave him a polite hello when they made awkward eye contact, and he struck up a conversation with her. I wasn't paying any attention at first, but then I heard him ask my mum, "Do you have any sisters?" I saw him peer over at me, clearly taking interest. Me being a shy 12-year-old, tried to hide from his gaze behind my mother's side. My mum joked that she had 2 sisters, but that they're probably much too old for him. They exchanged some polite small talk after that, which I didn't listen to, instead taking in the view of the sunset over San Francisco and the Pacific. We went about our separate ways for the evening. Over the next couple of days, we always seemed to be running into this boy and his family. My mother is an extremely friendly person, so she always would talk to them. His parents seemed nice enough. The boy would always look at me intensely. By that point in my life, I was still developing my first crushes on boys in my school. I sure as hell didn't know what to do. I didn't even know what his fixation on me implied. Just that it made me feel as if he was seeing right through me. I avoided his stares by staying near my siblings, almost out of an instinctive protectiveness. On the 5th day of our trip, my mum came in and said this boy wanted to meet and hang out with us. She said his name was Asher. I thought he was weird and didn't really want to, but I was always taught to give people the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps my discomfort was me being judgmental, I thought. I reluctantly agreed, and eventually he was in our hotel room. My mum gave me this smile and raised her eyebrows as if she was playing matchmaker. Then she went into her room, which was connected to ours. Asher was odd right off the bat, and immediately my siblings and I were extremely uncomfortable. We were watching Scary Godmother on Cartoon Network, and I awkwardly asked if he wanted to watch something else. He probably thought our cartoons were stupid. He said he didn't mind, as long as he got to talk to me. My oldest brother, who was 10 at the time, immediately picked up on my body language and what he said. So he joined in on the conversation to put me at ease. Asher had an accent. I couldn't tell if he was foreign or if it was a speech impediment. A lot of what he said I couldn't quite pick up on, and he would sometimes lean over to me and say something quietly that although I couldn't hear or understand, I knew I didn't like it. We spent the next while making awkward small talk about school, and he told me about his graduation coming up next summer. I asked if he was graduating junior high. No, he meant high school. He then revealed to me that he would be turning 18 that December. Sirens immediately start going off in my head, and then he hands me a note he said he had written for me earlier. With my hand shaking, I open a note that reads, "I love you, you're hot." I guess my brother saw the note from over my shoulder I went over to our parents' room, then came back in and said, "Hey, our parents said we have to go to dinner." Asher took this as his cue to leave, but told me he loves me one more time before his exit. I gave him a shaky, "Okay." My brother went to make sure that I was okay, and told me he had only pretended to go to our parents' room because he didn't want to get our mum in trouble with our ex-stepdad for inviting him. I know this logic seems weird, but please remember, we were all just kids. I was trembling and silent for a while. I didn't really understand what had happened. All I knew was that I had felt violated and confused. We later told our mum what had happened, and she then looked extremely guilty. She thought he was younger and that he had good intentions. She thought that it would be a good idea for me to meet friends closer to my age because I was stuck babysitting all the time. Turned out, for some dumb reason, my mum had given him our home phone number before he had hung out with us. I was livid, but too timid to speak up. I'd managed to avoid Asher for the rest of the trip, aside from on the loading docks on the final day. He said goodbye, that he loved me and would call me every day before leaving. He left before I could tell him not to. He called almost every week for 4 months after that, leaving strange cryptic messages on our answering machine. Every time we would block his number, he would manage to call from a new one. I had accidentally picked up a couple of times, not knowing it was him, and would immediately hang up, only for him to call 3 more times and leave the same strange messages. After a year, he finally gave up and stopped calling. So, Asher from the cruise, I may be old enough for you now, but please, let's not ever meet again, you creep.